Hi, my name is Raquel Griffin. I'm the Regional Administrator for the Federal Aviation Administration Western Pacific Region. Thank you for joining our virtual public information workshop on operations at Palomar Airport. While some of you are very familiar with operations at Palomar, we understand that this topic may be unfamiliar to others, so today we hope to bring you all up to speed on how and why aircraft operate as they do in and around this airport. We will walk through a plain language breakdown of how aircraft operate in the airspace at Palomar Airport, from the smallest propeller aircraft to commercial jets. We will lay out the factors like weather, terrain, and the airport's voluntary noise abatement program. Let's start off with some background about the airport and how it operates. That will be followed by our live question and answer session with a panel of experts who will help explain our roles and responsibilities.
Hello, my name is Jamie Abbott, and I'm the Director of Airports for San Diego County, which includes McClellan-Palomar Airport. I'm pleased to partner with FAA for this community webinar. Palomar Airport is committed to connecting and serving our community and promoting economic development, all the while continuing to foster a relationship with our airport neighbors and aviation stakeholders. I've been the Director of Airports since 2022. We have 7 airports in our system, both serving the general aviation community as well as providing commercial airline service to our business and leisure travelers at Palomar Airport. The airport is operated using funds from the Self-Sustaining Airport Enterprise Fund at no cost to the general public. Palomar Airport is a commercial service airport owned and operated by the County of San Diego and located in the city of Carlsbad. The airport provides valuable general aviation, corporate, and commercial airline service, acting as an economic engine for North County, San Diego, and the city of Carlsbad and the surrounding communities. It serves as a gateway to world-class resorts and tourist attractions and as a means of connectivity to and from the area. The airport provides important linkage to a global economy, attracting corporations and those wanting to do business in North County, San Diego. Economic activities related to the airport generate hundreds of millions of dollars of economic impact for the surrounding local communities. Palomar Airport has a rich history which began in 1959 after it was relocated from Del Mar due to the construction of Interstate 5. When it was constructed, the area was mainly dominated by agricultural uses surrounding the airport. The airport is named for Gerald McClellan, an aviator and civic leader in San Diego's North County. In early 1960s, we added a terminal building, administration offices, and expanded the runway to 4,700 feet. The FAA added a control tower in 1973, and in 1978, the airport was annexed into the city of Carlsbad. Over the years, as the region grew, the airport also grew in activity with a peak in annual operations in 1999 of nearly 292,000. For many years, the airport served as a favorite location for pilots to train and base their general aviation aircraft. As North San Diego and the city of Carlsbad developed robust centers of business and industrial parks, the airport began serving as a vital link to global markets for corporate clients and also expanded commercial airline service. Commercial airline service was growing with multiple airlines when the county began building a new passenger terminal in 2007. On January 29, 2009, we opened a new 18,000 square foot state-of-the-art terminal. When the new terminal opened in 2009, there was only one airline operating at the airport. This airline stopped service in 2015. Since that time, several airlines expressed interest in starting new commercial service at a Palomar Airport, with American Airlines resuming service in 2025 and United Airlines starting service in 2026. We are also home to charter airlines such as JSX and Advanced Air, serving multiple areas in the region. In 2021, the county worked closely with stakeholders to develop and adopt a new 20-year master plan, which provides a comprehensive approach to strategic planning for the airport's facilities and services, and is intended to develop a framework for the future of the airport within the context of local, regional, and national aviation system environments. General aviation is the foundation of Palomar Airport. Most of the activity here is from small propeller aircraft to train pilots for careers as professional pilots. And in 2024, there was a total of 172,000 aircraft operations. Palomar Airport is an integral part of the regional economy, generating $543 million in economic activity each year and supporting roughly 3,200 jobs in the San Diego region. The airport's capital and operational expenditures, on and off airport employment, and visitor spending each contribute a significant economic benefit to the region. The airport services also provide competitive benefits to key industries in the North County region. High-value industries such as life sciences, communications and information technology, defense and transportation, healthcare services, and tourism all benefit from the connectivity provided by the airport's current operations, and the airport is expected to play an increasingly critical role in supporting the growth of economic activity in the region in the years to come. It's important to note that this is all done without using local tax dollars to support or maintain the airport. Thank you for joining us today. San Diego County Airports has many different and important aviation stakeholders, and we all have roles and responsibilities in delivering aviation services for the community. Again, we are pleased to be here with our partners to answer your questions.
This video provides an overview of aircraft operations at McClellan-Palomar Airport, also referred to as Palomar Airport. The FAA uses three-letter identifiers for airports in the United States. McClellan-Palomar Airport's three-letter identifier is CRQ. We'll talk about typical operations at McClellan-Palomar, including noise abatement procedures. When an airport is constructed, the runways are built to align with the most common wind directions in the area. This is because aircraft generally take off and land into the wind to maximize performance and safety. In the Carlsbad area, winds most often come from the west. Therefore, at McClellan-Palomar Airport, the runway is aligned from west to east. Aircraft operations at CRQ are influenced by winds, terrain, other airports in the vicinity, and voluntary noise abatement procedures, called VNAP. As shown in this animation, McClellan-Palomar Airport has one runway. Runway identification is based on the magnetic compass direction the aircraft is facing as it lands or takes off. For example, runway 624 is oriented with a magnetic compass heading that is approximately 60 degrees easterly in one direction and 240 degrees westerly in the opposite direction. If you drop the 0 at the end of the compass heading, you will get 6 and 24. Due to the predominant offshore wind direction, aircraft most commonly depart and arrive to the west on runway 24. Airport infrastructure is designed based on the aircraft size and performance characteristics, namely the aircraft wingspan, tail height, and approach speed of aircraft that regularly operate at the airport. This is known as the critical design aircraft. The critical aircraft determination is an important aspect of airport planning and design for federally obligated airports. The FAA defines the critical aircraft as the most demanding aircraft type or grouping of aircraft with similar characteristics that make regular use of the airport. Regular use is 500 annual operations, including both itinerant and local operations, but excluding touch-and-go operations. An operation is a takeoff or a landing. The types of aircraft that operate at an airport can evolve over time, and airport sponsors, such as the County of San Diego, can work with the FAA towards implementing improvements to meet the needs of current and anticipated future types of aircraft operations. Palomar Airport has established the Gulfstream 600 series as its critical aircraft for future planning purposes. These Gulfstream aircraft fall into Aircraft Approach Category D and Airplane Design Group 3, otherwise known as Runway Design Code D3. D3 aircraft currently operate at Palomar Airport. Palomar Airport's master plan is the airport's planning document charting the necessary improvements needed to meet the airport's runway design code, D3. While this is the critical design aircraft, other aircraft may use the airport at the discretion of the pilot in command, depending on their operational profiles. A variety of aircraft land and take off at McClellan-Palomar, all operating in the same airspace. The primary responsibility of the FAA's air traffic control system is to provide the safe, orderly, and expeditious flow of air traffic. This is accomplished by teams of FAA air traffic controllers who ensure airplanes are safely separated while maintaining the most efficient flow of air traffic. Air traffic control requires great precision and is highly complex. Adding to the complexity, large swaths of military restricted use airspace are not available for civilian use. All of these elements are puzzle pieces that fit together at Palomar, which is part of the larger national airspace system. During good weather with clear skies and calm winds, aircraft most often land and depart on runway 24. Aircraft from the east typically fly straight in, establishing on the precision approach path no more than 5 miles from the runway. Aircraft from the north or west will fly parallel to the runway, then turn towards the runway to land. Air traffic control sequences these aircraft along the final approach with those aircraft arriving from the east, ensuring they're properly separated. Business jets and commercial aircraft utilize Palomar due to its location near San Diego, providing a location that's more accessible than San Diego International Airport. Aircraft coming from international destinations may land at Palomar and clear customs without the need to fly into a larger airport. Depending on the weather, jet aircraft may land to the west or east on an instrument procedure that provides guidance to the runway using onboard avionics. Departing jet aircraft on runway 24 fly a heading of 245 degrees until reaching the shoreline, and then turn towards their destination. Once reaching the shoreline, aircraft are directed by air traffic control with progressive headings to join a published precision departure procedure. Much of the propeller aircraft activity is for training. These aircraft are also used by law enforcement agencies, medical transport, sightseeing, and recreational flyers. Southern California, blessed with good flying weather year-round, is home to a large number of airports that play an important role in ensuring the U.S. continues to have the world's safest airspace system and well-trained pilots. Palomar Airport is among these airports that serve as bases for flight schools that deliver a supply of pilots. Most of these pilots are training to fill the critical role of a pilot shortage in the aviation industry. The FAA sets standards for pilot training in federal regulations called Part 61. The minimum flight training requirements for a private pilot certificate include 40 hours, which is a combination of at least 3 hours flying at night, 20 hours flying with a certified flight instructor, 10 hours solo flying, 3 hours cross-country, and 3 hours using instruments to navigate. Once a student pilot has shown their mastery of all maneuvers required and time for each of the noted categories, an FAA-designated pilot examiner conducts a practical exam. If they determine the student is proficient, a certificate is issued. Understandably, mastering takeoffs and landings is a key requirement aspiring pilots must meet as part of their ability to get their private pilot certificate. Given these licensing requirements, flight training aircraft fly many circuits around an airport to depart and land again, called touch and goes. As pilots train beyond their private pilot license, this training continues to include the requirement of pilots to master landings and takeoffs. At Palomar, the majority of aircraft operate north of the runway. Palomar Airport's voluntary noise abatement program was developed with input from the community, air traffic control, airport stakeholders, and airport staff. The noise abatement program provides guidance and recommendations to pilots to help minimize low flight concerns and noise levels over residential areas, as well as raise residential and pilot awareness of noise. Safety, however, always supersedes noise abatement procedures. In the interest of transparency, Palomar Airport has installed a state-of-the-art airport noise and operations monitoring system with an industry-proven partner that has decades of experience managing complex airport noise issues. The system currently has 6 noise monitoring terminals placed around the airport that monitor noise levels of both approaching and departing aircraft. Additionally, the airport has also set up an airport flight data dashboard website for the community to use to research aircraft operations and trends. While the Palomar Airport VNAP is not mandatory, it is quite extensive and incorporates aviation industry best practices that aim to reduce noise impacts on the communities and surrounding areas. Safety is the priority of pilots and air traffic controllers. Unless there is a safety or operational need, pilots and air traffic controllers voluntarily observe these procedures. A pilot may deviate from a procedure to maintain a safe course, avoid terrain or another aircraft, or to comply with directions from air traffic control. In order for those noise abatement procedures to be mandatory, they would have to comply with the Airport Noise and Capacity Act and be approved by the FAA. This act and implementing federal regulations at 14 CFR Part 161, Notice and Approval of Airport Noise and Access Restrictions, limits the ability of airports to implement new mandatory access or noise restrictions on types of aircraft. This is because restrictions may not be imposed if, among other things, they place an undue burden on interstate or foreign commerce or are discriminatory against a type, kind, or class of aviation. Many factors affect the airspace and airports in Southern California. High traffic volume, proximity of surrounding airports, surrounding terrain, weather, voluntary noise abatement procedures, and the number and layout of runways are key factors that affect how we safely and efficiently bring aircraft into and out of the area. For more information, please visit our website.
My name is Thomas Gordon, and I'm the General Manager of the Los Angeles Air Traffic Control District, where we manage air traffic from Santa Barbara to the San Diego border.
This presentation will walk you through the flight procedure poster boards for the arrival and departure procedures at Palomar Airport, as well as operations in controlled and uncontrolled airspace.
Each of the following boards shows a sampling of approach and departure procedures and radar flight tracks. These flight tracks represent a random sample of 5 days from April 2025, unless otherwise noted. The flight tracks and procedures are all overlaid on a map of the surrounding area. Each board is oriented north facing up. The name of each flight procedure is shown by an arrow on the map containing a 5-letter name. Arrows for arrival procedures point toward the airport, while arrows for departure procedures point away from the airport. For example, this board shows 2 departures, Padres and Seaward. These are called SIDs, or Standard Instrument Departures. A few acronyms are used by air traffic controllers explaining the boards in the next text. The spelling of each departure and arrival procedure is limited to 5 letters. For example, the spelling of CWARD departure is pronounced Seaward. The stars on the board are locations of waypoints, which are fixed navigational points in space that the aircraft fly to. Just as with the spelling of procedures, waypoints are spelled with 5 letters. For example, the GYWNN waypoint would be pronounced Gwyn. The flight procedures are colored purple for departures and orange for arrivals. These colored paths show the existing published flight paths. Surrounding the paths are dispersed path areas in either pink for departures or yellow for arrivals. These areas show the typical locations where aircraft fly and account for the different routing to keep aircraft properly separated, whether or for safety or operational need.
The procedures use satellites and GPS for guidance, as well as ground-based navigational aids. For arriving aircraft, once on the standard terminal arrival route, or STAR, controllers either verbally direct the pilot to the final approach or instruct them to use traditional ground-based navigation called an ILS, or Instrument Landing System. In the busy San Diego airspace, aircraft arriving or departing may be vectored off their procedure for sequencing, safety, or to avoid hazardous weather.
Aircraft that are vectored are given a different heading to fly than the published procedure. The bullet points on the right side provide additional details about the operation.
This board shows an overview of existing operations at 7 busy airports in the greater San Diego area. This airspace is busy and complex, with aircraft arriving and departing at airports simultaneously.
Aircraft in San Diego operate in both controlled and uncontrolled airspace. When aircraft are in controlled airspace near an airport, they're in contact with air traffic controllers that give them varying levels of guidance based on their type of flight. This board shows the published instrument arrival procedures for runway 24, called the Lagos arrival. This is the only published STAR for Palomar Airport. It can be used by all types of aircraft. It is most commonly used by jet aircraft. When aircraft on an instrument flight plan are landing on runway 24, they fly the Lagos arrival until reaching the passive waypoint. Then air traffic control gives the aircraft vectors to follow to intercept the ILS or RNAV approach. Area navigation, or RNAV, is a satellite-based arrival procedure, while ILS procedure uses ground-based navigation to guide the aircraft to land. Aircraft on the Lagos arrival are sequenced to the arrival stream approximately 5 miles from the airport. This board shows a closer view of flight tracks from the Lagos arrival with an approximate location of the radio signal array from the ILS. Aircraft use the Lagos arrival in weather conditions that require aircraft to use onboard instruments to land instead of visual cues outside of the aircraft. Approximately half the aircraft that file a flight plan use the Lagos arrival from the north or west. This board shows aircraft landing on runway 24 arriving from the east. This is the most commonly used arrival path. Aircraft are given vectors by air traffic control to intercept the ILS or RNAV approach approximately 5 miles from the airport. This board shows 2 graphics that represent noise abatement departure procedures, called NADP1 and NADP2. They were developed as best practices to provide noise abatement for communities either close in or more distant from the airport. Each operator develops its own NADP in accordance with aircraft type specifications and operational requirements. The airport's voluntary noise abatement program recommends that operators follow the National Business Aviation Association, or NBAA, noise abatement guidance. Of course, pilots always operate with safety as first priority and may perform a climb out as required for safety or operational need that does not use NADP. This board shows the published instrument departure procedures for runway 24. These procedures are most commonly used by jet aircraft. Aircraft departing Palomar in an instrument flight plan use the Padres or seaward departure. Fly straight until reaching the shoreline, and then are given vectors to the Gwin or Padres waypoint. These procedures guide aircraft out of the San Diego area to join the en route airspace. This board shows aircraft flying without an instrument flight plan on runway 24. Aircraft fly a heading of 245 until at least the shoreline. After reaching the shoreline, aircraft may navigate to their destination using outside visual cues and onboard navigation. This board shows small propeller aircraft operations, which are those typically used for training, recreation, news, law enforcement, and sightseeing. Aircraft may stay at their local airport and fly in the traffic pattern, or they may fly to another airport.
Pilots who fly out of Palomar and other Southern California airports often practice flying in areas over the ocean or open land. These locations, referred to as practice areas, are used for training. Pilots must adhere to all FAA regulations, including being 1,000 feet above populated areas and 500 feet above unpopulated areas. Pilots may also practice using onboard instruments, navigating to and from ground-based navigational aids. The closest to Palomar is the Oceanside VOR.
This board shows general aviation flight tracks from small propeller aircraft. These aircraft use visual flight rules called VFR to navigate, which requires pilots to use visual cues to stay clear of other aircraft and terrain. The blue circle shows the airspace associated with Palomar Airport, which is 3 miles from the center of the circle to the boundary. The airspace is called Class Delta when the tower is operational between the hours of 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. When the tower is closed and there are not air traffic controllers on duty, aircraft can still take off and land. Pilots communicate their location on a common radio frequency.
As propeller aircraft enter the airspace, a best practice adopted by many flight schools is to be at or above 2,300 feet mean sea level to reduce noise for the community.
This board shows aircraft flight tracks from aircraft flying the traffic pattern. When aircraft fly the traffic pattern, they depart and fly straight until they are at least 500 feet off the ground and climb until reaching an altitude of 1,503 feet mean sea level or 1,172 feet above ground level. Aircraft then follow the pattern of the sky before descending to land. As part of the Voluntary Noise Abatement Procedure, or VNAP, it is recommended that aircraft do not perform practice landings or approaches between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. An aircraft should only fly to the north of the airport when the tower is closed. Aircraft in the traffic pattern are sequenced to land based on various factors, including ATC rules, aircraft performance, pilot request, number of aircraft in the pattern, and spacing requirements. AT establishes minimum spacing requirements between aircraft based on factors such as aircraft type, speed, and wake turbulence category. Aircraft are sequenced to meet these spacing requirements. Therefore, during busy times, aircraft may fly 3 to 4 miles past the runway, then turn back for spacing. This graphic shows the same flight tracks flying the pattern colored by altitude. Most aircraft are at least 500 feet mean sea level before turning parallel to the airport. Once parallel to the airport, aircraft are between 1,000 and 1,500 feet mean sea level. Aircraft then start to descend and prepare for a stable approach to land.
Hello, my name is Nate Morsey, and I'm an FAA Safety Team Program Manager with FAA Flight Standards. Flight Standards creates and controls the certification and management of pilots, mechanics, airlines, air charter companies, repair stations, pilot and mechanic schools, as well as private citizens who do work on behalf of the FAA known as designees. For example, FAA designated pilot examiners called FAA DPEs are authorized by the FAA to give pilot practical exams. This board gives an overview of pilot training required to fly commercially. The majority of pilots in the United States start flying in small propeller aircraft, progressively advancing to larger aircraft. This process takes a lot of time and it is guided by the safety standards and regulations set by the FAA. All pilots are subject to the same rigors and testing consistent with the FAA's overall mission to operate the safest airspace in the world. Pilots are required to fly with a designated pilot examiner when they are ready for the next rating, which gives the pilots authority to operate a certain type of aircraft. These testing regulations focus on safety, risk management, and decision-making skills. In the past, most airline pilots started in the military. Today, the majority of airline pilots train outside of the military at airports like Palomar. This civilian training is critical to creating a pipeline of new airline pilots and easing the airline pilot shortage.
Hello, my name is David Senzig, and I'm the acting manager of the Noise Division in the FAA's Office of Environment and Energy. This board shows the aircraft noise regulation process for jet aircraft and the noise limits for those aircraft. These aircraft noise regulations are found in the Code of Federal Regulations, Title 14, Part 36. Noise regulation of aircraft began in the 1970s. As technology advances, the FAA and the International Civil Aviation Organization increased noise stringency by lowering the allowable noise levels required to certificate new aircraft. Each increase in noise stringency is referred to as a new stage. In 1990, the Airport Noise and Capacity Act, known as ANCA, was passed that initiated the phase-out of pre-Stage 3 aircraft. Aircraft with noise levels higher than Stage 3 are no longer authorized to fly in the United States. Stage 3 certification standards were introduced in 1989, then Stage 4 in 2006, and the current certification standard, Stage 5, in 2018. Stage 5 aircraft are cumulatively 17 decibels quieter than Stage 3 aircraft at the 3 noise certification measurement points. In addition to jet-powered aircraft, the FAA also regulates noise for helicopters, propeller-driven aircraft, and tilt rotors. Because aviation safety is the FAA's primary concern, noise stringency is only increased when the required technology has been approved as airworthy.
Hello, my name is Dr. Paul Rosinski with the FAA's Office of Senior Technical Experts within Aircraft Certification Services. The Eliminate Aviation Gasoline-Lead Emissions, or EAGLE initiative, is a collaborative effort between the FAA, general aviation community, fuel suppliers, airports, engine manufacturers, researchers, local communities, and environmental groups. The goal of EAGLE is to transition the fleet of approximately 220,000 piston engine aircraft to a lead-free fuel, and to do so in a safe and efficient manner by the end of year 2030 and 2032 for Alaska. The commitment to EAGLE was recently reaffirmed in the 2024 FAA reauthorization bill. There are many ongoing activities and priorities tied to the development, approval, or authorization and the deployment of unleaded fuels. One of our priorities is to stay connected, provide information, and engage with you, the stakeholder community. To keep updated on the EAGLE initiative and for information in addition to today's discussion, please visit the EAGLE website at flyeagle.org.
Hello again. Thank you for participating in our virtual public workshop. I will moderate our discussion. And because addressing community concerns about aviation is a joint responsibility that we share with aviation industry and airports across the country, we're pleased to have our airport partners from the County of San Diego joining us today. And in addition, we have representatives from Palomar Airport Association and the Airline Pilots Association who will answer your questions from their perspective. Now, let me introduce you to our panelists. Nathan Morrissey, FAA Flight Standards. Paul Rosinski, FAA Senior Technical Specialist Aircraft Certification. Victor Globa, FAA Office of Airports Assistant Manager. David Senzig, FAA Noise Division Manager, Ian Lewis, FAA's Palomar Airport Air Traffic Control Tower Manager, Jamie Abbott, County Airports Director, County of San Diego, Jason Herman, Airline Pilots Association Safety Liaison, and Alan Balbus, Palomar Airport Association. We sincerely appreciate the participation of our panelists. And because the challenges around aviation and noise are complex, and well, really, they must be addressed by the entire aviation community. I hope that the information that we provide together in this live Q&A provide value. So let's go ahead and get started. Sorry. So we have a great opportunity here to address the public's questions on a number of issues, and we really have to do our best to clarify our specific roles and responsibilities in keeping the public safe while flying in and out of McClellan-Palomar Airport. So let's kick us off with one specific safety-related question that I understand is at the heart of some community members' concerns, which is it safe to fly commercial aircraft in and out of McClellan-Palomar Airport? So I'm going to go to almost every member of the panel because you all have your roles and responsibilities in ensuring that an airline's proposed service is safe at that airport before that airline is authorized to operate, and also while the airline is operating. So hopefully everybody knows the FAA's highest priority is safety in the national airspace. So I'm going to start with the FAA's Flight Standards Office as the airline and pilot safety regulator. Nate.
Thanks, Raquel, and good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. The question is it safe? Absolutely. And what I encourage people to do, I mean, I'm going to go into why I feel it's safe and, from FAA and the flight standards, but, if you Google statistically, how safe is it to fly on commercial aircraft? It's outstanding. I tell people when I meet with them, it's, 100 to 200 times safer than driving a car. But, to narrow it down to why it's safe to fly commercial aircraft out of Palomar, let's just take a look at what the FAA does and at the level I'm at, which is flight standards. And I want the public to keep in mind that there's many departments and offices of the FAA like any other government entity. So we appreciate your patience when trying to find answers because it can be hard getting to the right office. Us ourselves, we have, frustrations at times when we have to reach out to other agencies in the government stuff. So getting into this is how it works when an airline wants to operate out of Palomar. And like we saw in the video, you got to keep in mind that the FAA doesn't reach out to the airlines going, hey, we want you to come fly out of this airport for business purposes. So when an airline has a want or a need to go work or operate out of a certain airport, they work with the airport closely. And then as they finalize that with the airport, then they come to the FAA for approval. So I'll give you a little bit of what that looks like. So when an airline has a request to fly to a certain aircraft into a certain airport, our role is to make sure that they can do it safely before they even start operations and keep making sure it's safe once they start operating. So before the first flight ever happens, a lot of work goes on behind the scenes. We look closely at the airline's manuals, procedures, training programs to make sure they really address the specific airport and aircraft that they want to use. We look at things like terrain, runway length, obstacles, or any other special procedures. We confirm the airline has done proper safety risk assessments to operate at that new airport. We make sure pilots are properly prepared, including any special training or familiarization that might be needed for that location. We review their performance data, dispatch planning, operational control to see whether everything works in real world conditions and not just on paper. So, and if there are higher risks involved, we may require what's called validation flights or additional safeguards before giving that approval. But that's just before even operation, before that initial approval. But once that operator starts flying and flights actually begin, we don't stop there. So we conduct ongoing oversight surveillance, which includes observing flights, reviewing training, looking at dispatch procedures, maintenance, evaluating how well that airline safety programs are working. We watch things like safety trends, to catch potential issues early before they turn into serious problems. And if we see any risks that are increasing, we work with the airline to make sure that they put corrective actions in place. And if we see a non-compliance or unsafe practices, we have the tools ranging from what we call compliance actions or enforcement actions, and also to limiting their operations to protect the public. So just keep in mind that approval is just the beginning, and then continuous oversight is how we ensure safety stays strong over time.
Thanks a lot, Nate. I think I'd like to go next to the San Diego County, who runs the airport, because they also have an important role.
Hi, Raquel. Yes, and first off, I want to thank you and the FAA team for leading the discussion tonight, and the panel of experts for being here as well. So really appreciate it. From the county's perspective, we share the FAA's focus, which is the safety and security of the flying public out of Palomar Airport. And we do that by meeting federal safety standards, and I'll kind of talk about what that means a little bit later. But our realm of responsibility is really everything on the ground. So we own the infrastructure, which means the runway and the taxiways and the aircraft aprons, making sure all the lights and signs are operable. We purchase specialized equipment and offer specialized service like aircraft rescue and firefighting to be the first responders on the airport should we have an incident. We also conduct training of our staff and our stakeholders. We do regular inspections of the complete facility. We have a team of operations coordinators that does a complete inspection at least twice daily. And we have a maintenance team that actually fixes whatever needs to be fixed. And so our focus is the infrastructure at the airport, even though we do a lot of other functions as well. We also have a responsibility to protect the airspace around the airport and really discourage non-compatible land use. And we've got a great tool to help us do that. It's called the Airport Land Use Plan. And any development around the airport really is vetted through this plan that discourages things like cell towers from being built next to the airport and so forth. Lastly, I'll just mention that, of course, we're good partners with the Transportation Security Administration, or the TSA, to ensure the safety of the airline passengers that use the terminal building and get on our commercial traffic. I mentioned federal standards, and specifically we meet what's called Part 139 standards from the FAA, and that really means that we are certificated commercial service airport, which is why we have airline service. And that's a pretty extensive set of requirements that we have to meet. Annual inspections by the FAA. We have to do triennial real live exercises of an aircraft incident, which we just had late last year that went really well. And so it's really meeting those standards that's most important to us, and those regular inspections to make sure that we are up to standard to be a commercial service airport.
Thank you, Jamie. And I think that's a perfect segue for me to go to Victor Globa from the FAA's Airports Office. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Sure. Thanks, Raquel. And Jamie hit on a couple of spots, but I'll just reiterate. The Office of Airports provides leadership in planning and developing a safe and efficient national airport system. Some of the areas of focus include airport safety, which includes, as Jamie mentioned, the 14 Code of Federal Regulations, Part 139 airport certification. Also include aircraft rescue and firefighting, wildlife hazard mitigation, and safety and management systems. Planning elements also include National Plan of Integrated Airport Systems, System and Master Plans, Airport Layout Plans, Capacity Planning, Aviation Forecasting, Runway Length Analysis. Once the planning is done, we get into the engineering, design, and construction, which can cover elements such as the lighting, design, visual aids, pavement management. Furthermore, we have to look at the airspace analysis, runway incursion mitigation, runway safety areas, snow and ice removal. Yes, we do have snow and ice removal issues in Western Pacific region. And additionally, the engineered materials arresting systems. Each year, this Office of Airports awards approximately $3.5 billion nationwide in airport grants through the Airport Improvement Program, plus additional funding through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and improves passenger facility charge collections totaling approximately $2 billion. Finally, this office is also responsible for environmental requirements tied to federal actions and establishes policies related to compliance with grant assurances which airport sponsors, such as the County of San Diego, must agree to when receiving federal funding.
Thanks. Yeah, that's a lot, Victor. So I think I'd like to turn over to our pilots, Alan and Jason, as pilots in command. Whether you're a general aviation or a commercial pilot, you have responsibilities to ensure that you and your aircraft safely take off and land at an airport. So talk about how you make that safety determination. And I'd like to go to Jason first, and then I'll Alan next.
Sure. Good evening. And Raquel, thanks for the opportunity to come and chat. I represent the Airline Pilots Association, which represents over 40 airlines and 80,000 airline pilots, myself as a commercial airline pilot based in Los Angeles. I would say Palomar is an extremely safe airport to operate at. The airlines, as Nate touched on earlier, all complete a very comprehensive safety risk assessment prior to operating at any airport, particularly those with new commercial service. And so there's a very rigid and comprehensive path to evaluate the airport, not just the runway itself, but all the support that is around the airport, like airport rescue and firefighting, which is something that is enabled through Part 139 airport certification, and something that some of the other panelists may be able to speak about later. But also the use of the taxiways, ground equipment, terrain, availability of instrument approaches and departures. So it's a very comprehensive look at not just the runway itself, but all the facilities that are used at the airport, visual navigation aids, instrument navigation aids, all the things that we need to effectively fly safely in and out of an airport.
Thanks, Jason. Alan, I believe you fly a lot at that airport. So just from your perspective, your safety role.
Thanks, Raquel. And yes, I do fly a lot. I'm a general aviation pilot. And as the pilot in command, we're all trained from the very beginning to follow an acronym called NW Craft. And I'm not going to bore you with what all those letters mean, but the spirit of the acronym is that we evaluate the weather at our departure airport and destination airport and any airports along the planned route of flight. Next, we review NOTAMs, which is Notice to Air Missions, which is a service that provides timely feedback from pilots who have flown that route in the not so distant past. So we have a bit of a history of what's going on in that area. We then assess the runways. Can we safely take off from the departure runway? Will we be able to land safely on the arrival runway based on length, surface conditions, and current weather? And then finally, we consider the known traffic delays and fuel planning. In other words, do we have enough fuel to reach our destination with appropriate reserves? And if the conditions prevent us from landing at our destination, where is the nearest safe alternate airport? So this goes on in the cockpit of a small aircraft. Every time we get in the airplane, whether we're going to go to Ramona or we're going to go to Paducah, Kentucky, we have to go through these steps to make sure that everything is safe and we can have a safe flight.
Thanks a lot, Alan. And I'm not going to go to Ian, who's our air traffic control, because I think everybody knows that his main role is to ensure that the traffic around the airport is safely separated. Ian will have plenty of opportunity to speak to other topics later. So really, I hope that the audience is hearing that there are so many safety layers involved: the FAA, the airport, the air carrier, the pilot, which highlights, and as Nate pointed out, why aviation is such a safe transportation mode. I'm sure there'll be more follow-up questions, so I'll stop there and let me go to another question here, which is a related question that I understand is frequently raised among the Palomar communities, has to do with design aircraft for an airport. This, I think, can be confusing. There's a planning process which involves establishing design aircraft, but that doesn't necessarily dictate or reflect actual operations at an airport. So I'm going to turn it over to Victor to hopefully help the public understand the difference first, and then I'll go to Jamie.
Great, thank you. And as Raquel said, there is some confusion here. Runway design codes such as B2, C3, and D3 that are referenced are codes used by the FAA, airport operators, airport planners, and engineers to signify the FAA airport design standards that apply to an existing or planned runway to provide for optimal safe operations by the critical design aircraft under desired meteorological conditions. The runway design code is based on existing and planned development and does not have any operational applications. Operations of aircraft exceeding airport standards is not inherently unsafe. It is the responsibility of the airport operator and ultimately the pilot in command to ensure that the aircraft can be operated safely at any particular airport and for any particular set of conditions. However, the county cannot restrict airport access based on design standards.
Thanks, Victor. And I think you kind of reiterated some of the points that we already made or members of the panel made earlier. And let me go to Jamie and, again, speak to this issue from your perspective as an airport operator.
Sure thing. And thank you, Victor, for really giving a good explanation of design standard versus operational standards as well. So, I mentioned before that our real responsibility from the county's perspective is the infrastructure and the planning of future development. And that's because we are the owners and operators of the airport. So that requires us periodically to look at new design standards for the airport, making sure that we're meeting those currently. And also look at future design standards. We look at what's called the critical aircraft. Generally, that's the largest aircraft that currently uses the airport over a certain amount of operations. And so we determined in our master plan process that ultimate design of the airport will eventually be a D3. Currently, we are a B2 airport. We've been a B2 airport for decades, and that's not changing anytime soon. However, we do have a responsibility to plan for the future, and that was addressed and discussed in the master planning process. I don't know if we'll talk about that later, but just a general overview. About every 20 years or so, airports will do what's called a master plan, where it's a really comprehensive view of current conditions, noise, and really future development of the airport in the next 20 years. And so from that master plan, we developed what's called an airport layout plan, or an ALP. And that's really the technical document that really lays out the current design of the airport, which is a B2, and then the ultimate design in the future, which is a D3 to meet the critical aircraft that currently use the airport.
Thanks, Jamie. I think I'm going to go to a different topic, which I believe is also of great interest: voluntary noise abatement procedures, or VNAPs. Before I go to the panelists, one point of emphasis I'd make is that by definition, these are voluntary, and therefore they cannot get mandated or enforced. But there are a number of things. I started this conversation talking about the fact that we all play a role. And so certainly we as stakeholders here collaborate to try to limit the negative impacts on the public of aviation activity. A few examples, you heard about them already in the videos: voluntary nighttime quiet hours, arrival and departure patterns and suggested altitudes, and many others. Now, Jamie, since the videos already spoke to Palomar Airport's VNAP program, is there a key point or two you'd like to highlight?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think what I really want to highlight is we feel it's our responsibility to be a good neighbor to the community. And that's why we fully support the VNAP program, even though it is not mandatory. We do educational campaigns to speak to the pilot community about the VNAP through flyers, through visits to flight schools and corporate flight departments. Everyone saw the video at the beginning of the meeting here. And so we really take it upon ourselves to make sure that we're doing what we can do to educate on the VNAP program. And I will say, I think pilots as a whole really want to follow the VNAP. And so that's been our experience. But we are going to take steps to process and improve our noise office. We're going to staff that up and bolster that program for us locally so that people can have a voice in noise concerns, We also talk about noise in our advisory committee, what's called the Palomar Airport Advisory Committee, every other month. And so we want to make sure that we are taking the steps to hear community concerns about noise.
All right, thank you. Now I'm going to turn over to Ian. So air traffic's number one priority above all else is safety, safely separating aircraft in the Palomar airspace. But please talk about your commitment to the VNAP program and give an example of when you may need to instruct a pilot to deviate from the VNAPs, and maybe speak to how often that might happen.
I appreciate the opportunity to be here with everyone, Raquel, tonight, and for all the folks out there in the audience. With respect to the VNAP, this largely in part falls to pilot compliance, but the times that we would go outside of that would prevent a pilot from adhering to the VNAP goes back to our sequencing and separation within the Class Delta airspace, or for those aircraft that may be coming in straight in on that ILS or that RNAV approach. We deal with a multitude type of aircraft, being props and jets and helicopters, and at times those sequences may prevent us from allowing those pilots to embrace that VNAP and be a good neighbor, all in the name of safety, not to annoy any of our neighbors down there on the ground.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Ian. And I think Alan can also provide, from a pilot perspective, certainly first starting with how he learned about the airport's VNAP program and what you do to adhere to them as well as you can, and give an example of when you might deviate from them.
Certainly, the active VNAP is announced on all automated weather reports, which every pilot in an airplane before they take off is mandated to listen to before each flight. Additionally, as a reminder to the pilots, there are VNAP signs on both ends of the runways. But directly to the question, my first encounter was at a Palomar Airport Association meeting where the VNAP pamphlet was placed on every table. Subsequent to that, I attended an FAA-sponsored seminar specifically discussing the VNAP. I then asked the presenter to attend a PAA meeting to further discuss the VNAP with our attendees. Since then, every Palomar Airport Association meeting distributes the VNAP handouts, and at least one meeting a year is dedicated solely to air traffic controller and the VNAP subject. So we try to get the message out best we can via the Palomar Airport Association. As to deviations, there are two that come quickly to mind. The first one is expedite your turn. So let's just say my desired route is to the north, i.e. I fly runway heading to the coast and make a right turn once I get to the coast. ATC will some percent of the time instruct me to expedite my turn prior to reaching the coastline. This is done to move my plane out of the way of other departing aircraft. The second one is fly 360s. When the pattern is busy, it's not uncommon for air traffic controller to instruct me to fly one or more 360-degree patterns to allow for better spacing for incoming aircraft. And unfortunately, to the layman on the ground, it would seem I'm needlessly circling over homes. So these two, and there's more than these, but these are the two most common things that we'll see that would deviate from the VNAP.
And I'm going to turn it over real quick to Ian just to ask for a head nod if there's anything that you might have said that he would disagree with. Or
No, not at all. And I mean, while Alan and all of his buddies are flying there at the airport, and trainee pilots and the executive jets that are flying it, including the airlines and whatnot, there are multiple flows that come into Palomar Airport. And our job as controllers is to be able to see that, affect a safe operation by sequencing those aircraft that give them the best opportunity to make a stabilized approach to that runway.
Yeah, thank you. Jason, you're a commercial pilot and you likely fly in and out of many noise sensitive airports. So is there anything else from your perspective that that would be helpful for our audience to know?
Sure. So as Alan mentioned earlier, as pilots, but more so as pilots in command, the captain of the aircraft, we're responsible for the safe outcome of the flight. So we take safety very seriously, but we also want to be good neighbors, and we're very sensitive to the noise community as well. So by FAA regulation, through operation specifications, which are effectively authorizations from the FAA as an extension of FAA regulation. We're required to, as operators, develop two different noise abatement profiles, which was briefly mentioned in the introductory video, known as NADP1 and NADP2. And those are the two types of noise abatement departures that we are authorized by the FAA to fly. One is NADP2, which is more common throughout the United States, where we reduce thrust, usually around 1,000 feet, maybe at 800 feet is the minimum, and then accelerate to a climb profile. NADP1 is used at more noise-sensitive airports, where we delay our thrust reduction in an attempt to climb more steeply and gain more altitude before we reduce thrust and accelerate on our normal climb profile. Those are both trained extensively throughout all of the air carriers. We receive regular recurrent training in the simulator. I myself just came back from recurrent training last week where we practiced both types of noise abatement departure procedures. So we're very familiar with the procedures and how they're used. Additionally, each air carrier develops their own internal company operating procedures for each and every airport that we operate out of with regular service. So, for example, in Palomar, commercial operators will have specific designated company pages with guidance for pilots to follow when flying in and out of Palomar.
Thanks so much. Okay, so I think I'm going to follow up with a logical question that comes up. If voluntary noise abatement procedures can't be enforced, is there an avenue for mandatory noise restrictions? And to answer this question, I'm going to turn to Victor, who I think can help provide the historical context first of why in the US, very few airports actually have mandatory noise restrictions today. So go ahead, Victor.
Thanks, Raquel. Southern California airports such as San Diego International, John Wayne, and Long Beach are airports that are routinely referred to as having noise rules, mandatory noise rules. These noise rules vary by airport. Congress had concerns that these various noise and access restrictions would create a patchwork quilt of regulations and impact the national aviation system. As a result, Congress passed the Airport Noise and Capacity Act of 1990, also referred to as ANCA. Airports that had noise rules prior to the passing of ANCA were grandfathered and can keep those existing access and noise restrictions. ANCA established a national program for the review of airport noise and access restrictions. It shifted authority for noise abatement away from local governments and airport proprietors to the FAA. One critical provision was the directive to eliminate the use of civil subsonic Stage 2 aircraft such as DC-9s, 727, 737, 200 turbojet aircraft weighing more than 75,000 pounds in the contiguous U.S. after December 31st, 1999. Additionally, Stage 2 aircraft under 75,000 pounds were addressed by Congress in 2015. Title 14 Code of Federal Regulations, CFR Part 161, Notice and Approval of Airport Noise and Access Restrictions implements ANCA. An airport sponsor may seek approval for a mandatory noise or access restriction per Subpart D of Part 161 and must demonstrate the following. We mentioned these earlier, but I'll reiterate them again. The restriction is reasonable, non-arbitrary, and non-discriminatory. The restriction does not create an undue burden on interstate or foreign commerce. The proposed restriction maintains safe and efficient use of navigable airspace. The proposed restriction does not conflict with any existing federal state statute or regulation. The applicant has provided adequate opportunity for public comment on the proposed restriction, and the proposed restriction does not burden the national aviation system. Numerous airport sponsors have undertaken a Part 161 study, and none have met the above-mentioned conditions.
Thanks, Victor. I think safe to say that Congress kind of set the bar pretty high for these mandatory noise restrictions. I'm wondering, Jamie, is there anything else you'd like to add, since I presume you get this question a lot? We can't hear you right now.
Thank you. And thank you, Victor, for really great information on the Part 161 and associated criteria to meet those requirements. The county does have a responsibility to evaluate noise. We do that through, one of the ways is through a Part 150 study, which the county did about 20 years ago. It's a really comprehensive look at noise, and it includes public input and so forth. Most recently, with our master plan update and approval in 2021, we re-looked at the noise footprint around the airport, and again determined that there's no residents within what's called the noise contour, the 65 CNEL, which is the community noise equivalent level around the airport. So we do take the responsibility of regularly evaluating the noise around the airport. We also do that with several noise monitors around the airport that pick up both aircraft noise and community noise. And so we're constantly evaluating whether we do another Part 150 or pursue a 161. And so that's kind of a constant process for the county.
All right. Thank you, Jamie. I think I'm going to kind of move to, because we're getting a lot of questions. So hopefully we kind of set the stage for some of the key questions. And now I think we need to get going and really get into the more nuts and bolts and dig a little bit deeper into the questions. So we have a question from Congressman Levin. Does the FAA approve what size aircraft can utilize Palomar Airport based on safety considerations? I think that in our previous Q&As, we tried to, we kind of addressed this question to some extent, but I want to go back to Nate and, talk about, again, the sort of the FAA's approval process when it comes to, airlines and general aviation that use their aircraft at airports.
Sure. So as I mentioned before, it's a pretty lengthy approval process, both prior to an aircraft or an airline operating and after. But I saw in one of the questions in the chat, does American Airlines have approval to operate out of Palomar? The answer is the American Airlines subsidiary, Envoy, has the approval by the FAA for takeoffs and landings at Palomar Airport. But so to answer the question, it just depends on the type of operation, as you alluded to. So in this example, like we were talking about for Envoy, again, the American Airlines subsidiary, they do have approval. So since for that type of commercial operation, we do give approval for that airline to operate that aircraft for takeoffs and landings out of Palomar. And yes, it's absolutely safe, as I mentioned in the opening of the questions. But that's for commercial operations. So when you have private operations and what we call general aviation operations, that makes up a majority of the operations at Palomar Airport. And then that is solely up to the pilot and command and the operator themselves to determine, is it safe for that aircraft to, land and depart from Palomar Airport? So to answer your question, it just depends on the type of operation.
Right. Yeah. I think I've heard examples of what might seem like very, very large aircraft being able to take off and land safely at airports. So I think, the bottom line is there's the responsibility with the pilot and command and the operator. Okay, let's see. Let's go to the next question. We have another question from Congressman Levin. Palomar Airport's last Part 150 airport noise compatibility planning study was done in 2006. Since then, the city of Carlsbad's population has grown approximately 21%, with much of that population growth around Palomar Airport. How often should a Part 150 study be done? I think there are various folks in our panel who can help answer this question, but I wanted to turn to Dave Senzig first because we are going to be using terms, there's a lot of lingo in aviation and noise. So I'm wondering, Dave, if you can kind of walk us through some of the technical stuff that those of us in the business know very well, but I'm hoping that would be helpful to our public to better understand. So talk about metrics, talk about, what we use them for, et cetera.
Sure. Yeah. Happy to do that before we turn it back over to Jamie and to Victor, who will talk about the specific circumstances at Palomar. As you mentioned, the Part 150 process provides information about the noise environment at the airport. It's mostly provided through what we call noise exposure maps. The Part 150 process requires these maps to be generated for both the present and the future scenarios at the airport. Because the process requires future noise information, we use modeling, not measurements, to determine the noise levels at the airports. Now we're going to get into the part that Raquel warned us about. At Palomar, we use the CNEL metric, which is what Jamie mentioned. The CNEL 65 level is used to determine the significant impacts from noise. That CNEL metric is actually comprised of noise levels from all the operations that occur at the airport. Those individual operations are accounted for by using another metric underneath that, which we refer to as the sound exposure level, which is very similar to a metric which other folks have asked about if it's used at the airport, which is the single event noise equivalent level. But those two are basically the same, that it's the foundation that's used for individual aircraft that are used as input into the larger CNEL metric. Each one of those metrics, each one of those events that has that individual metric, we weight that if that operation actually occurs in either the evening or in the nighttime operation. So an evening operation between 7 and 10 p.m., we will weight that by a factor of 5. If the operation occurs in the nighttime between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m., we weight that as a factor of 10. So the CNEL metric tries to account for your lived experience for how you would be exposed to noise during the evening or the nighttime operations that you might find more annoying. I think the metrics are actually explained in a little bit more detail in the FAA website, which is www.faa.gov/noise. And at the end of this event, I believe we're going to have the QR codes up for those for people, so that you can go right to the FAA website. You can get a little bit more detailed explanation on those if you'd like. And I will turn it back over to Jamie and Victor if they want to talk about the individual aspects at the Palomar Airport.
Go ahead, Jamie.
Sure. Thank you. And I think I'll just speak directly to the Congressman's question about the frequency of a Part 150. And I don't know that there is a specific requirement of a time frame. However, it is our responsibility, like I mentioned earlier, that we do continually evaluate noise levels at Palomar Airport and all of our airports. And we do that through noise monitoring, evaluating the fleet mix at the airport with the stage 3, 4, and now even 5 aircraft that currently use the airport. And if there's a compelling reason to update the NEMs, we definitely do that. And like I said, we previously did that about 5 years ago when we did the master plan. And so from the county's perspective, it's a constant evaluation of the operations at the airport and whether that really warrants an updated NEMs or those noise exposure maps.
And Jamie, let me just follow up that in the event the 65 CNEL contour changes over those noise sensitive land uses, that increase or decrease significantly changes, then the county would be required to update its noise exposure maps. Additionally, from a Part 150 perspective, if you're seeking federal funding to mitigate any noise impacts, then you would be required at a minimum every 10 years to update those contours. However, my understanding is that the county at this time does not have any impacted noise sensitive uses within its noise contours.
All right, thank you very much. I hope that we've addressed that question, but again, we have more opportunities to, we can have follow-up questions on that topic. Let me go to the next question here. The airport is running at 30% capacity. How is this beneficial to taxpayers? Wouldn't the land be better used for housing generating tax revenue? I think this question is for you, Jamie.
Yeah, that makes sense for me. Yeah, capacity at the airport is measured a few different ways. It's quite literally the space on the commercial ramp that can accommodate aircraft or at our FBOs. And so that's kind of one constraint that airports have. We also measure capacity by enplanements from the commercial activity, so the airlines. An enplanement is every person that gets on an airplane at the airport. And with our environmental review from the last master plan, that number was established as a benchmark. Once you reach that benchmark of enplanements, then you need to take some mitigating efforts for capacity and so forth. And so, yeah, that 30%, there is room to grow there. I will speak to the financial side. Just a reminder, I think I talked about it in the video, but the Airport Enterprise Fund is totally self-sustaining. And so that is sustained by the stakeholders on the airport, the tenants. We're basically landlords and we lease the ground to private companies. And so that AEF is self-sustaining. We don't draw money from local tax dollars. And so, yes, we're constantly looking at ways to, accommodate, new activity if we can, because that does benefit the AEF and makes us self-sustaining, which the FAA really likes us to be as well.
Okay, thank you. I'll go to the next question, which also goes to you, Jamie. Is WebTrack the best way to submit reports on aircraft not following VNAP?
Yes, from our perspective, we think that WebTrack is the best way to do it. It's a good tracking software for us, so that we can log that activity and respond if we need to. It's a really good tool to kind of match the noise complaint with the actual operation of the aircraft. And so I think that is our preferred method to receive noise complaints, but there's also the noise hotline and so forth. And we're always willing to accommodate complaints via those avenues as well.
Okay, thanks. We have another question from Congressman Levin. How can the county implement mandatory quiet hours at Palomar Airport? Is this done through the Part 161 process notice and approval of airport noise and access restrictions? Victor, I think it's important to just reiterate, because I think this is a question that a lot of people have interest in. So could you please speak to this?
Sure. As I mentioned earlier when we were talking about the notice and approval of airport noise and access restrictions, should the county seek approval for mandatory or noise or access restriction, they'd need to meet the criteria identified in subpart D of the Part 161. There are 6 criteria. I'll reiterate them again. The restriction is reasonable, non-arbitrary, and non-discriminatory. The restriction does not create an undue burden on interstate or foreign commerce. The proposed restriction maintains safe and efficient use of navigable airspace. The proposed restriction does not conflict with any existing federal statute or regulation. The applicant has provided adequate opportunity for public comment on a proposed restriction, and the proposed restriction does not burden the national aviation system. Routinely, we also get asked, has anybody ever met that criteria or initiated an access restriction? In the early 2000s, actually, Naples, Florida initiated an access restriction. However, it was for stage 2 aircraft under 75,000 pounds, and which basically became a moot point across the rest of the country when Congress phased them out in December of 2015. Multiple airports have initiated the Part 161 process. To date, none have been successful in implementing access or noise restrictions due to its stringent requirements.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm going to move to the next question. Flight ID 1200, I understand, and I'm literally, I'm reading the question literally. Flight ID 1200, I understand, has no record of tail number. How are reports correlated to an aircraft using WebTrack if no tail number is assigned? Jamie, can you answer that question? And maybe I'll go to Ian. I'm not sure.
Yeah, let me take the first crack at it. So our county noise specialists, they correlate noise complaints to pilot data available on the WebTrack system. And then they do the outreach to the pilots to educate them on the VNAP. So the WebTrack really is helpful in helping us get that information to be able to contact the pilots. Not familiar with Flight ID 1200.
Yeah, Ian, might you maybe help us with what that might mean?
All of what Jamie had said, I defer to him. As far as air traffic is concerned, we do not utilize those tools with respect to noise abatement procedures. And again, as we talked about earlier, with this being a voluntary noise abatement procedure, air traffic largely, that's not our wheelhouse. So with what Jamie said, I concur with his.
Do you think that's a squawk?
They probably could have been inferring to a beacon code on an aircraft, and largely those are VFR aircraft, unless air traffic specifically issues an aircraft a discrete code, which typically will not come from Palomar Tower. That's usually SoCal TRACON, which is the overlying air traffic facility, or LA Center, that's located in Palmdale. So discrete beacon codes, they may see a call sign on that with an associated data block from our radar scope, or maybe even one of these other private entities online. But Palomar Airport does not issue any discrete beacon codes.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. All right, the next question. Can altitude ceilings be increased on approaches and departures from and to the north? Be increased in approach, sorry, let me start again. Can altitude ceilings be increased on approaches and departures from and to the north, like they were at John Wayne Airport, to decrease noise and pollution? Jason, can you speak to that a little bit from your experience? And then maybe I'll go to Ian.
Sure. I can't necessarily speak to it from the procedure design, and maybe Ian can chat about that here in a bit. But with respect to the altitudes that we fly, the predecessor to a safe landing is a stabilized approach. So I'll take it from the angle of the approach to landing side first. So the safe outcome of a landing is really traced back to the approach. And so our set of stringent stabilized approach criteria make that happen. And so those requirements are to be aligned with the landing runway by a specific distance or altitude from the runway. Typically in industry, it's usually 1,000 feet above the airport elevation. We want to be aligned with the landing runway. That way it's straight ahead of us and we have a clear path to the landing runway. It also includes making sure we have all of our final configuration of landing gear and flaps. That way we're not making any changes low to the ground. It also includes being at the correct airspeed by a certain target, typically around 500 feet, but it can vary by the airline. And then also making sure that our thrust is at the appropriate setting so that we're in a safe position to land or go around if one would be needed. If there's a reason why we had to go around, whether that's for weather or environmental factors or traffic separation, that we're prepared to do so. So the approach into Palomar is actually at a slightly steeper angle, mainly for terrain and obstacle clearance. So that altitude that we're approaching from, particularly from the east, is already slightly raised above what most airports are already. On the departure side, our goal is to continue climbing. We want to climb as quickly and efficiently as possible to get up to our cruise altitude where the air is thinner and it's more efficient to fly. And so it's pretty rare when departing Palomar to level off at a low altitude after departure. Typically, the Southern California TRACON, which is the air traffic control facility that we speak with on the departure side, is trying to achieve the same objective, which is to get us up to altitude in a practical manner. And so it's pretty rare to be held down low for long periods of time. It's much more typical to keep our climb progressing. And so in the interest of noise abatement, that's usually a strong objective as well, is to keep our climb going and to increase altitude as high as we can to be good neighbors.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. And I think you may have spoken to this, but let me just reiterate in case, because I think this might be of interest. Like, how far out from the airport in terms of miles do you begin your stabilized approach? More or less.
So the stabilized approach typically would begin maybe 5 to 10 miles from the airport. We have different points on our approach where we have different requirements, whether it's be runway aligned with the runway or on speed, or fully configured. But we generally start fully configuring for landing with landing gear and flaps somewhere between 5 and 7 miles from the airport, and that's to ensure that we're in a safe position to continue our landing.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. And Ian, would you be able to answer this specifically with respect to Palomar? I mean, I feel like, I know we have standards and criteria, but anything you can speak to this question?
So specific to the question, honestly, no. I said with John Wayne and how that was referenced, obviously that's not my area of jurisdiction, but with respect to approach and departure procedures within the air traffic organization, a different line of business known as flight program operations, which we all know as flight check, in conjunction with our QCG personnel in the service area, always review these procedures. Aircraft have to come out and flight check these procedures to make sure that they hit the altitudes, that the equipment was working the way it's supposed to, so the crews and the aircraft can get down to the ground safely. So as far as amending procedures outside of the class of Delta, as departures and approaches, that's outside of Palomar Airport's purview.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be safe to say that, the FAA will design procedures to meet criteria and standards. So I think that's probably the best we can do for that one. Let me go to the next question. Most aircraft, or at least a significant number of aircraft, are not taking off north of Palomar Airport Road. The aircraft are taking hard left turns into residential neighborhoods at very low altitude. Why? And can we please enforce takeoff paths? Ian, maybe you can help explain why sometimes you need to turn aircraft early. You may have spoken to this earlier.
Well, with respect to turning aircraft earlier, that I would say is a bit inaccurate with respect to the phases of flight in a departure sequence. The pilot and command have the responsibility to get that aircraft up to an altitude of safe operation that complies with the FARs. Anything that we do prior to that is distracting to the flight crew with respect to what they're trying to accomplish. So as far as early turns are concerned, those may happen at an applicable altitude that is safe for the pilot and that works for our sequence with respect to the traffic coming into the airport. And that's what I have for that.
Okay. And I think, I don't know if this question is getting at a VNAP, but as we stated before, they're voluntary, and you at the tower, you're not enforcing voluntary procedures, right?
No, but it is always, again, to Alan's point earlier when we started, that we do transmit this on the ATIS, that pilots do know, and they see it on the signage that Jamie talked about. So everyone is well aware of what the expectation is at the airport. Unfortunately, like I said, with air traffic, we are the non-regulatory piece of that entity. So, we expect the pilots to do what they're supposed to, and we help them out as much as we can if they have to deviate from ATC instruction or any type of expectation that the chart sub may have for them operating at the airport.
Yeah, thank you. Alan.
Yeah, I think it's important to point out I fly out of Palomar quite often, many hours. Seldom do I ever turn left. However, there is an approach, if we're on a practice IFR approach, that always sends us over to the south. And that could be what this particular question is about, is that we have, if you're on a practice IFR approach, and you do what we call a missed approach or practice missed approach, almost always air traffic controller will tell us to go south, which puts us over the neighborhoods. And that at a low altitude, that could be what they're asking about.
Okay. Yeah, Ian?
And to Alan's point, that is an accurate statement with respect to the practice approaches that come into the airport. And to explain to the folks that are listening home tonight, aircraft typically in VFR conditions will practice the instrument approach procedures to any specific airport. And in order to keep the system moving efficiently, we would turn them early, climb them sooner, to get them back into the system to either come back around or to make a full stop landing. But yes, to Alan's point, that's
All right, thank you. Now we have another question from Congressman Levin. What steps can the county take to better enforce compliance with the VNAP? And how can the FAA assist in this effort, specifically related to air traffic control involvement? We kind of have been throughout this trying to speak to the different things that everybody's trying to do to ensure that folks are adhering as much as they can to the voluntary noise abatement procedures. But Jamie, I think it'd be helpful for you to kind of reiterate what the county is doing. And then Ian, again, reiterate your commitment to these voluntary noise abatement procedures.
Sure thing. And because it is a voluntary procedure, what we can do is do our best to encourage pilots to use the VNAP procedures and really continue to educate the pilot community of noise sensitive areas around the airport. And I think I mentioned it earlier, but we're going to start by bolstering up the noise office to address noise complaints. We've installed noise monitors, additional noise monitors in the community, and that feeds a dashboard for us so the public can go in and see what the noise monitors are actually picking up and so forth. It's all about encouragement and education and just continuing to engage the community, not only the pilot community, but the community that surrounds the airport. And really doing what we can to encourage the use of the VNAP program.
Thanks, Jamie. I think, Victor, you already spoke to how this has been, making these mandatory. There have been some instances in which they've been tried, but really they've been unsuccessful to date. So I think we also noted that this is it's a tall order in order to be able to make mandatory noise abatement procedures. So I'm going to see if Ian, anything else you can speak to with respect to these noise procedures, since the question specifically is asking, air traffic control's ability to address this. I think
Absolutely.
Go ahead. Sorry.
But no, just adding on to Jamie's point, air traffic, we really don't have the statutory authority to enforce noise abatement, but we do again encourage pilots via the ATIS, which was a broadcast on a frequency there at the airport, to let them know that these voluntary noise abatement procedures are in effect. And routinely, when we do these outreach briefings, air traffic is also involved, answering questions, and advising the pilots again to, just be good neighbors and participate the way that we're trying to have them do, so we can mitigate some of these noise issues that happen every so often.
Jamie, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I failed to mention, but I think it's important to let everybody know that we fully support our PAC, our advisory committee, and they've actually formed a VNAP subcommittee, which has been working really hard on finding maybe additional ways to mitigate noise. What are some new ideas that we can implement to encourage the use of the program? And so fully supporting that group. I think they're going to come back with a final report to the committee here soon, and just really appreciate their efforts to help bolster up that program.
Thanks, Jamie. And Jason, I see your hand.
Yeah, I want to take an opportunity to thank the county as well. I think the San Diego County does a really good job with making the information available to the pilot community. I think that's something that's challenging. We operate out of so many different airports, whether it's general aviation or commercial airlines. sometimes it can be challenging to find specific information related to noise at a specific airport that we're flying to or from. And I think the county's made it much easier for us to locate that information, whether it's through printed material or electronic material that we can put on our electronic flight bags. Mostly gone are the days of paper charts, so we have everything on iPads now, so we have that available to us. And it's also in graphical form. So it's not just text, but it shows us graphically where those noise sensitive areas are and what the expectations are of the voluntary noise abatement procedure. So I think it's a very comprehensive material for pilots to be able to digest, especially in a visual format.
Yeah, thanks for your perspective there, Jason. We have a lot more questions. I'm going to move on to the next one. Why is airport traffic south of Palomar Airport significantly limited, yet it is not for north of Palomar Airport? I live north within the 3-mile radius, and the traffic noise is incredible and increasing. So I'm going to turn it over to Ian to talk about the tower up pattern, and then see if Jamie has additional input there.
Well, with respect to that, again, north of the airport, we have the Oceanside VOR, which I'm sure the viewing public saw about that was explained briefly earlier. That's one of the busier navigational aids in the airspace, where that provides an instrument approach procedure known as the VOR approach into Palomar Airport. There's a lot of training going on out there, a lot of holding aircraft coming from that direction as well. Also, too, on those good weather days where folks want to get out there and fly up and down the coast, there's a lot of traffic coming in from the south as well. There's traffic coming in from all angles for the Class Delta there at Palomar. And our job there is, again, to safely sequence and separate those aircraft as best as we can to mitigate a collision of aircraft trying to get to the airport. So with respect to, southbound or traffic south of the airport, it's as equally as busy.
Jamie, is there something you could speak to with respect to, at least your understanding of the traffic around your airport?
Yeah, I think Ian pretty much covered it. It's kind of what I was going to mention, is that the published pattern around the airport is to the north, and it's a right traffic. So it's kind of a right traffic racetrack on the north side of the airport. And unless they are directed otherwise by ATC, that's probably going to be the typical pattern.
Yeah, and let me remind kind of all of us in the panel that if there's something among the boards that would be helpful to kind of help explain in answering the question, I think that's something that our the folks helping us out can bring that up. So I just wanted to offer that if that's helpful. Okay, let's go to the next question. Which agency is responsible for maintaining the instrument landing system, ILS, and runway lighting equipment? Nate?
So for the instrument landing system, or the ILS, the FAA has a department or branch called Tech Operations, and that is made up of a group of technicians and pilot and aircraft that monitor that system and manage the maintenance of it. So we have aircraft that actually routinely are shooting the instrument landing systems and various other approaches in FAA aircraft, testing the accuracy in the air. And it's a pretty cool, setup. You have pilots up front, and then you have people in the back with a bunch of electronics, monitoring everything. So it's pretty cool. But so that's in the air, and then on the ground, tech ops. And then for runway lighting and stuff, that's a collaborative effort between the airports, tech ops, and our FAA airports division. So it's like the airport, like Jamie, would be involved with that as well. So yeah, that's who oversees it.
Great. So, but mostly FAA, right? Okay. Next question. Why can't the FAA and Palomar require airplanes not to use leaded fuel? So I'm going to turn it over first to Paul, who was on the video speaking about our efforts there, and then over to you, Jamie. Go ahead, Paul.
Thanks for calling. Glad to be here with the audience today. So just as a reminder, Victor mentioned grant assurances previously. So a grant assurance, right, is an FAA administered financial assistance program for multiple airports. And implementing something that could be a discriminatory rule could result as a violation of a grant assurance. And Congress actually spoke to this in the 2024 Reauthorization Act. Specifically, Section 770 states that the airport owner or operator cannot restrict or prohibit the sale or self-fueling of 100 octane low lead for purchase or use before 2020 unless certain criteria are met and a fuel is authorized for use by the FAA administrator. So for right now, right, we've got 100 low lead until we have unleaded fuels that have been developed and authorized and approved for use. The information that you would be looking for on those unleaded fuels can be found through the Eagle website. There's a lot of resources there that talk to the status of the testing of the fuels, the development of specifications for the fuels, and ultimately how we're going to get unleaded fuels that are safe to use across the fleet out to replace 100 low lead so that we can, again, move away from leaded fuels by that 2030 deadline. And again, the Eagle website is a great source for that, and that's at flyeagle.org.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Paul. I think you pretty much answered why, Palomar Airport cannot require, or FAA and Palomar Airport cannot require the use of unleaded fuel. But Jamie, is there something else from the county's perspective with respect to this issue that you want to speak to?
Yeah, thank you, Paul, for speaking to the regulation piece of it and the grant assurance piece. But the county fully supports the Eagle program, which is an initiative to get lead out of fuel by 2030. We continue to follow legislation and requirements. We also supported this initiative in our recently completed sustainability management plan for our airport system. It's a comprehensive plan of sustainability efforts that we all can take, both county and our private stakeholders, and getting unleaded fuel alternative into our airports is one of those initiatives. And so I think it's largely driven by the private sector and the supply chain on this type of fuel. And so we will do what we can to encourage our private partners to offer the fuel. But as Paul mentioned, we just can't eliminate leaded fuel at this point until a solid alternative is available for everybody.
Very good. Thank you. Next question. Can pilots fly without filing a flight plan? What happens, and is this allowed? I'd like to ask our pilots.
I can jump in, Raquel, if you'd like.
Yes, please.
So the answer is unquestionably yes. Pilots can absolutely fly without filing a flight plan. San Diego has some of the best weather in the country for flying VFR, or what we call visual flight rules. In other words, we're clear of clouds. And that does not require filing a flight plan. And I would go farther to say I'd probably estimate 75% of prop planes on a clear day take off without filing a flight plan. Jets, on the other hand, almost always file a flight plan because they're almost always taking off on an IFR or instrument flight rules flight plan. So the answer to the question is absolutely yes.
Jason.
I can speak to it from the air carrier side. So generally speaking, yes. For the commercial side, we are required to file and fly under instrument flight rules using an IFR flight plan. These are all flight plans that are coordinated through our flight control or dispatch centers for our respective airlines. Unlike the general aviation community, we operate at much higher altitudes in the National Airspace System, which require the use of IFR flight plans. And even when we're operating visually, we're often using underlying instrument approaches and departures to operate in and out of an airport. I would also go further just to mention that just because a general aviation aircraft is not filing or using a flight plan doesn't mean that they're not necessarily controlled and separated by FAA air traffic. And Ian can speak to that. But during the operational hours of the tower, even if a flight plan is not filed or used, all aircraft are in touch with and receiving control instructions from the FAA air traffic control.
So to add what Jason and Alan were talking about with respect to the flight plans, If an aircraft specifically wants to say, as an example, take a flight from Palomar up to Long Beach, and they're requesting air traffic services, and this may go back a little bit what I said earlier as far as issuing discrete codes, we coordinate with the overlying air traffic facility, which is SoCal-TRACON. If they want to be given air traffic services on their way to their destination, we provide that discrete beacon code for them to squawk on the ground. Once they're airborne, the overlying air traffic facility can see them on their radar scopes, and they provide the service as long as that VFR aircraft wants those services. At that time, we can terminate those services, and that pilot will be on their own to comply with the FARs and navigate the system as they're expected to as a pilot in command. As IFR flights are concerned, we issue those clearances on the ground. More times than not, they have the ability to pick those IFR clearances up in the air. However, those flight plans are still coordinated between facilities to ensure the efficiency of the system so we don't overload the airspace above us.
And just to reiterate, VFR is visual flight rules, IFR is instrument flight rules, and FAR is federal aviation regulations. So, because we have a lot of acronyms. Okay, next question. How can you say you support the VNAP program when the commercial flights take off at 6:30 a.m.? I think I'm going to go to you, Jamie, first.
Sure. Yeah, and we had this discussion with American Airlines when they first started service at Palomar, and asked them to maybe push their flight after the VNAP hours to 7 a.m. And it's really a business decision on an airline or a commercial operator when they need to depart the airport, whether it's our corporate partners, flight departments, or an airline. In American's case, it just made the most sense to get people into their network in Phoenix in time to make those connecting flights to other part of the country. And so there really is a logistical reason for doing that. Also, I think it's mentioned before, we can't discriminate on telling aircraft when they can and cannot fly. We have to treat every operator equally per our grant assurances, and so that's a big part for us as well. But bottom line, we continue to encourage the program, and we'll continue to do so with future operators.
Thanks. And I think from the FAA's perspective, we have to provide the service as it presents before us. So I think that kind of, Ian already said we support the VNAPs as much as we can. But in the end, when there are aircraft, we need to process them in the air, right? So, okay, let's see. I'm going to go to the next question. How much will commercial airlines lower our property values? Honestly, it's expensive to live here, and we understand it's a trade-off. My family moved here from LA a generation ago and raised another generation here. We enjoy the wonderful lifestyle. There are very few places where you can go to the beach, mountains, desert, etc. It's already changing by getting loud with new unexpected flight plans. Safety impacts FAA. Too many unknowns without guarantees to benefit the public. I think I'm going to turn to you, Jamie, to kind of address the property value question.
Sure. And I'll just say up front, I'm not exactly an expert in property values, but I can speak to the county's recognition that people are noise impacted around the airport, and that we've gotten the property value question before, and it really all comes down to being the best neighbor that we can to the community. I will mention that our most recent economic impact study reflected that there's significant positive economic impacts to the surrounding community, with airport-related capital investment, employers employing people in the community, visitor spending, airport-owned business park activity, and it all just really contributes to the regional economy. And so we think there's value there, but understand the concerns with noise and property values at the same time.
Yeah. Understood. The next question is a different topic. Is the EMAS, and I'm going to have one of you spell that out, is the EMAS installation fully funded? If yes, when is construction scheduled? Jamie?
Yeah, maybe I'll start off by explaining what EMAS is. I don't know if we've done that yet tonight.
Yes, I think that would be a great idea.
Okay. Yeah, we all know what it is, but it stands for Engineered Material Arresting System. And I installed this in my airport in Chicago, and it's a great safety product. What it is really crushable concrete blocks at the end of a runway, so that it absorbs the energy of the aircraft should it not slow down in time at the end of the runway. And so it's a great product. It works really well. As far as the funding piece, no, it's not funded yet. I kind of mentioned our process to take capital projects to the FAA for consideration. And it was part of the master plan that we did in 2021 and part of the current AOP for the airport. And so because it is on our AOP, like I mentioned before, we put it in our 5-year forecast for capital projects. It competes with a lot of other important projects like runway rehabilitations, taxiway projects, and so forth. We are in the design phase, so we do expect construction hopefully in the next few years, but it's not currently funded. We haven't gotten that far with environmental review and design and so forth.
Okay. Thanks, Jamie. The next question, what penalty?
Hand raised there by Jason.
Pardon. Oh, yeah. Sorry about that. Yes.
Here we go. No worries. I just wanted to say that we're really encouraged to hear that the airport's exploring an EMAS system for the airport. It's definitely a significant safety feature. You know, as many in the community know, the runway at Palomar is not as long as it is at many other large commercial airports in the country. And so it's definitely a big safety benefit to the commercial air carrier community to have that in place. Even without that, though, it is important to note that, as I mentioned earlier, the analysis of the runway is very robust from an operating perspective. We're looking at not just the length of the runway, but also the width of the runway. The width of the runway at Palomar is actually wider than some commercial runways that are used throughout the country. It's also grooved, which helps disperse precipitation when we experience that here in Southern California. Hopefully not very often, but more so this winter season than in years past. So we're looking at lots of different aspects of the runway, not just the length, but also the width and the surface of the runway. So we're encouraged to hear that the airport's exploring EMAS, but there's also some additional safety features already in place.
Thanks a lot, Jason. Okay, the next question. What penalties and/or fines can the FAA impose for breaches of noise and safety standards? And what have there been from January to June of 2022 and for 2021, 2020, and 2019? I think I'm going to start noting that we don't have statutory authority to enforce penalties for breaches of local airport noise standards or procedures. I think we've already talked about the kinds of things that we are doing as an agency with respect to noise, but I'm going to turn it over to Dave to just kind of speak to some of the things that we're doing with respect to noise. But then when it comes to penalties or fines for noise standards, I think the answer is we really don't have any.
Raquel, let me just pipe in here for a second. So that unless
Yeah,
the noise
go
program, unless the noise program was enacted prior to the Airport Noise and Capacity Act in 1990, all noise programs are basically voluntary unless you've gone through the Part 161 process, and we've discussed that earlier, where to date no one has completed the entire process and gotten approval from the FAA to impose any noise or access restrictions.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Anything else? Oh, Dave, is there something you'd want to add?
Yeah, just to say that, we as the FAA, our primary method of controlling noise is through the certification process, and that is not static. We are currently working with our international partners on the next generation of noise stringency. So I think you saw, and a couple of people mentioned that we're currently at stage 5, but stage 6 is coming. We're working, as the technology becomes available, as it proves itself airworthy, and as people have always said, the first thing we do is safety. But as the technology is there, it proves itself airworthy and safety. We put that technology on the airplanes, and when it's available, we turn the screws one more time and go to a higher stringency for noise. And you can expect that, like it is coming. Like I said, we're working with the aviation's an international industry, and we work with our international partners, but there will be another stringency.
Thanks for that, Dave. I'm going to turn over to Nate because safety, of course, you already talked about enforcement. So can you just speak to that regarding this question?
Yes, flight standards, we don't regulate that, and we don't do enforcements on that. What I wanted to bring up, I know we're getting close on time here, but if we're going to get to aircraft altitudes, because it kind of segues into it, could I touch on that for a second? It talks about noise, or would you rather table it?
Well, I mean, I think we do have a lot of questions still to go through, but go ahead and speak if there's something relevant specifically to this question in terms of noise and safety standards.
Well, it is, because most of the people, it's been my experience in 20 years with the FAA that it's noise. And then sometimes they'll say, oh, well, we're concerned about safety.
Right.
And it's like, when reality is it's a noise issue. And I've literally helped hundreds of residents and talked through this. So I just, want people to understand that there are minimum safe altitudes that apply around an airport. But if you just Google FAA regulation 91.119, it's minimum safe altitudes. And in the beginning, it says, except for takeoff and landing. So except for takeoff and landing, there are altitudes that they have to maintain over populated areas such as Palomar, except for takeoff and landing. So for the people that call in and say, hey, this aircraft is low over my house, if it's within a few miles of the airport, it's what's necessary for takeoff and landing. So that was just a key point I wanted to get in there real quick that relates to the noise and the enforcement. So relating back to that, we'll enforce altitude deviations more because we don't do noise. So if there is a low flying safety concern, that's where flight standards comes in.
Yes, perfect. Thank you. Okay, next question has to do with a metric. How do we get SENEL, single event noise exposure level, implemented at Palomar Airport? Who controls the methodology chosen, and how do we make the change? I'm going to turn it over to you, David.
Sure, thank you. So the individual aircraft events like the SENEL or the sound exposure level that's used in the to generate the sort of the more annual or daily events, those metrics are used. Those individual metrics are used to generate the DNL or the CNEL, and the DNL in this case is the day-night level that's used in the rest of the country. So to an extent, it's already being done. It's done with models. It's not done with measurements. As far as what we're doing to make a change, the Congress it was part of the Reauthorization Act of 2024. Directed the FAA to form an aircraft noise advisory committee to examine the continued use of the DNL, or California would be the CNL, and that 65 dB threshold that we use. The charter was created in January of 2025. It was amended in June of last year as well, and it's going to expire in 2027. We plan to issue a notice in the Federal Register for soliciting members of that committee. And that committee will have representatives of the engine manufacturers, the air carriers, the airports, the aircraft manufacturers, the air taxi manufacturers who are coming online, as well as institutes of higher learning like we have with some of our research projects, and also representatives of the airport adjacent communities from geographically diverse areas. So there's no guarantee what that committee is going to do, but that is part of the process that we have of looking to see if we actually do have the correct metrics out there. So it's something that we're looking at right now. And I'll turn it over to Victor if he's got any other things he'd like to say on that.
No, I think you pretty much summed it up.
All right, well, I'm looking at the time, it's 7:02. I think we're gonna be able to continue past the hour, maybe 15 minutes or so. Because we are still getting a lot of questions. So appreciate everybody's patience as we go through more of these questions. Okay, so let's see here. If larger and larger aircraft keep using an airport that's not designed for that aircraft, it can become the critical aircraft. And then the airport expands. It's a never-ending cycle. It's a build it and they will come mentality. How do we just leave an airport as it is? And I'm going to turn to Jamie first, and then I think maybe let's see if other folks can jump in there.
Yeah, that'd be great. I spoke of the master planning process, and that's really the formal mechanism for us to plan for the future development of the airport. And it was mentioned that the design critical aircraft is part of that consideration. I don't know about larger aircraft coming to the airport. I mean, we have D3 aircraft that have been using the airport for quite some time and use it regularly. And so that's where the design aircraft comes from. That's the Gulfstream G600 is what was identified. And so, that's already the design aircraft for the airport, and that's what we base our ultimate design on. And so as long as aircraft are within that category, I think maybe the Embraer 175 is a C3, which is a little lower category than that. That's really the basis we use to propose ultimate developments of the airport. I don't know if Victor has any corrections in that one.
No, you did a fine job there, Jamie.
Thanks.
What I wanted to clarify though is, and just to keep in mind that and this goes back to talking about the grant assurances, when airport sponsors or owners such as the county accept funds from the FAA administered airport financial assistance programs such as the Airport Improvement Program, they have to agree to certain obligations or assurances, and these obligations require the recipients or the county to maintain and operate their facilities safely and efficiently and in accordance with specified conditions. And Grant Assurance 22 is the one which requires the county to make the airport available as an airport for public use on reasonable terms and without unjust discrimination, all types, kinds, and classes of aeronautical activities, including commercial aeronautical activities offering services to the public at the airport.
Thanks, Victor.
Yeah, thanks for that. Let's move on to another question. Can a sound wall be constructed at the end of the runway to absorb the run-up sand of the commercial jets? Dave, can you speak to that maybe, or?
Yeah, I mean, on a little bit I can. So yeah, sound walls, they can be a solution. I mean, particularly for run-ups, you can't put them at the end of the runway though, because that's a safety issue. I'm going to have to defer to the folks who are more familiar with airport design about whether you could actually move that to a different. Could you move the run-up to somewhere else and then go to the runway? But yeah, you can't. At the end of the runway, literally itself is unfortunately a safety issue. And I'll turn it over to maybe Victor, who's airports guy, who might speak if that can.
Sure, David, and you're spot on regarding not putting anything at the end of the runway. And it's unclear whether they're talking about run-ups or specifically departure noise from that perspective, since you have aircraft that can do run-ups, and they're areas on the airport that potentially you could, maybe move them to do that for the actual run-ups. But as far as from a departure perspective, noise perspective, you wouldn't be able to put a particular sound wall on there. And I know, at least with some sound walls, depending as to what they are, you may have an immediate benefit just on the other side of the wall, but the noise itself still continues on, and you'll still hear the aircraft noise.
And I was just going to add, we were just talking about EMAS, which is kind of intended to, it's frangible or however you want to call it, right, Jamie? So yeah. Okay. Anybody else on that question? If not, I'm going to go to the next one. I live in a community west of Palomar Airport that experiences ultra-low aircraft overflights, often around 600 feet above ground level due to current approach procedures. Aircraft frequently use dive and drive techniques when entering from the west, which raises safety and noise concerns. My original question was about raising RNAV minimums or required navigation minimums, or realigning the ILS block track approximately 4 degrees north to route traffic over less populated areas. All right, that sounds like a Alan/Ian question. Who wants to go first?
I'll go ahead and take it. And again, referencing earlier with respect to changing any type of approach procedures, there are processes for that, and that's outside of air traffic's purview. Again, our airport airspace and procedure offices in Seattle reference the flight operation folks for the Western Pacific region. We usually meet and talk about if there have been any problematic situations with particular approaches for pilots navigating on. If that does happen, they go out there, and to Nate's point, they will flight check those pieces of equipment. If they need to raise the glide slope, they'll do so. As far as lowering minimums, those are specific to the type of navigation that aircraft are able to use, right? So the RNAV minimums are typically higher than that of the ILS, or the localizer, as they were referring to. Localizer minimums are going to be higher than the ILS, as that's a non-precision approach. So I'll go ahead and let Jason take over from here.
I just wanted to comment on the alignment of the approaches to the airport. If at all possible, we always want to be aligned with the runway as far out as we can to encourage and promote the stabilized approach criteria that I mentioned earlier. There are some circumstances where airports do have offset instrument approaches, and it's typically driven by terrain or obstacles, and not necessarily exclusively driven by noise footprints or things of that nature. It actually introduces additional risk into the national airspace system to have those offset approaches. And so we want to be aligned with the runway, particularly as we're approaching a low visibility. We're very fortunate with great weather most of the time here in Southern California, but there are times where low fog or precipitation are present. And so we have to be mindful of what that impact could be right at the minimums of an instrument approach, which is typically around 200 feet above the airport elevation and a half-mile visibility. So when we're in those reduced visibility situations, not being aligned with the runway very close to the airport presents additional risk.
Yeah, thanks. It's really helpful to have a pilot in this panel. There's another question. This one is from San Diego County Supervisor Lawson Reamer. Community members often share concerns of accessibility from the FAA when they have questions or concerns. Can you please state for the folks on this webinar who the best local contact is so that they have a direct person or set of people to contact? The easiest way for us to get to your questions is for you to send them to the noise portal or the answer portal. It's the FAA Aviation Noise Complaint and Inquiry Response portal. I think we'll have it on the QR codes as well, but it really is the way that we can ensure that there's it's always staffed. Somebody is always looking at that website, at the comments that are coming into that portal, and it ensures that we have a consistent and systematic way of addressing the questions. So that's really the most effective way to get to us. Because of the time, I think we have to get to the final question. And this question came from Congressman Levin. What steps can be taken to reduce noise impacts and improve safety for the communities surrounding the airport? There's so many things that we've already talked about that I think try to address this question. And I'm hoping that through this question, we're kind of going to be able to summarize and speak to what we're doing, both for safety and noise. I started this conversation again talking about how each of us has a role. I can tell you that from the FAA's perspective, the FAA created the National Airspace System to ensure that we have the safest and most efficient airspace system in the world. And that is a huge responsibility. It is something that we take very seriously. And I can tell you that right now, two of the highest priorities of the agency are perhaps things that you might have heard about. One is our emphasis on hiring air traffic controllers, because air traffic controllers have such an important role in ensuring the safety of the aviation system. And certainly, having more controllers applies not just to Palomar Airport, but to all other airports. And then the other one is the brand new air traffic control system that Congress recently funded or partially funded. And I can tell you that Palomar Airport is slated to have some of the new technology, new infrastructure that is part of that deployment to make sure that we have the safest, most efficient, most secure system on the planet. So those are kind of at a high level some of the things that we are doing on the whole, and that also would apply to Palomar with respect to safety. And for noise, I'm going to turn it over to Dave Senzig, because there are things that the agency continues to do with respect to noise. And then I'm going to go to Nate on the safety side again. So go ahead, Dave.
Sure. Yeah, thanks. Just continue on, the things that we are doing. This is a little more granular than the whole NAS that you just mentioned. But, when the FAA and manufacturers work on the certification of an aircraft, safety always comes first. We increase the noise stringency requirements, that is, lower the noise levels at which new aircraft are allowed to make after that noise technology has been proved to be safe and airworthy. So as these quieter technologies prove themselves airworthy, the FAA and the regulators around the world, as I mentioned before, we change those noise requirements to make use of that technology. So the next increase in that stringency is coming as we work with those partners. We also work with researchers and aircraft designers in a couple of sponsored projects that we have. One of them is called the Ascent Project. The other is the Clean Project, and I'll expand the acronyms there, though I can't expand the Ascent Project. It's actually it's pretty convoluted. And the Ascent Project, we work on both the measurement, the modeling, and the certification of the next generation of aircraft. So that's things that you'll see coming down the line of the air traffic, or excuse me, the urban air mobility vehicles, air taxis. We're also in that Ascent program, we're working on looking into the health effects of noise and also sleep effects. So we're doing research on how noise actually affects people. And that'll hopefully feed into some of the Aircraft Noise Advisory Committee that I had mentioned earlier. The CLEAN program, which is the continuously lower emission energy and noise, is what that acronym stands for. That's more industry oriented. So we're working with the aircraft manufacturers on near-term technologies that can be implemented on the current generation of aircraft. So we're finalizing technologies that can be implemented to improve the environmental aspects of those aircraft while still maintaining the safety and the airworthiness of those jet transports out there. That's a little bit what's going on in the background that you may not see on a day-to-day basis, but yeah, we are doing that. We are working that actively.
And again, all of those efforts kind of, the positive impacts of those kind of apply to everybody. So certainly would apply to Palomar Airport. Now, Nate, at the very beginning of this panel, you talked about what the agency is doing to ensure safety of operations. So I think if you could just sort of, very quickly summarize again some of those very important things that we're doing.
Well, for the airline side, again, there's constant oversight and inspections of the commercial aircraft operators. But, that's one of the smaller parts of Palomar Airport. Most of it is general aviation. But, the FAA does a lot of individual surveillance of flight schools, maintenance facilities. And it's like, well, maintenance facilities, but maintenance facilities are the ones that operate or maintain the aircraft, ensuring even more safety and stuff like that. But I feel that the noise hindrance for the community does make airports safer because there's much more eyes on it. There's much more people talking about it. I mean, we have all these questions from the congressman, and in my opinion, those questions wouldn't be there if there wasn't a noise issue. But so these are all great questions because the noise inherently makes more of a highlight on certain airports like Palomar. And so, I mean, look at all the people here today. We have air traffic, we have airports, we have everybody. So it's like there's a lot of eyes on this airport that inherently makes it more safe, just the oversight. And, for the community, if you do see something, I talked about low flying aircraft. If you do feel that you see an aircraft that's just flying way too low, give us a call. You can give the local San Diego Flight Standards District office a call and be like, hey, I had, this. Again, I've done this hundreds of times where people call and it's like, hey, we'll look into it. It's like, it's normal operations. Like, okay. And then every once in a while there is an issue. It's like, yeah, you know what? This guy was a really, kind of a little low. Give Ian a call at the tower. It's like, hey, do you remember this? Like, yeah, this is what was going on. So inherently, this is all good stuff. It's all making it safer. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you. And Ian and Victor, just in a couple of sentences, again, reiterate your commitments to the safety at Palomar Airport.
Well, sure. Again,
go ahead, Ian. All right. Basically, the Office of Airports, we provide that leadership and funding for the planning, engineering, design, and construction and development of a safe and efficient Palomar Airport and the national airport system.
Yep.
Did it in one.
Perfect. Thank you. Ian.
Well, we're going to continue to have that VNAP broadcasted on the ATIS. We're going to continue to work with our partners at the airport. That includes Alan and Jamie and the airport management staff to ensure that, we're encouraging pilots to adhere to the VNAP as much as possible.
Great. Thank you very much. And as we said, we do have, everybody here on the screen has a role in ensuring the safety and flying neighborly at the airport. Alan, I don't know if you were going to speak already to that or whether there was a comment you wanted to add to from what somebody else said, but go ahead.
Well, I'd just like to add to the comment, and I kind of think of this as the ground level, but the people listening can count on the Palomar Airport Association to continue the education of the VNAP, not just tomorrow, but every day or every time we have a meeting, every year we have meetings. So we're going to continue to get that word out as we have been in the many years past. That was my parting shot, I guess.
All right, thank you. And Jason, since we're talking to pilots here.
Yeah, so I did want to mention our commitment as airline pilots, as commercial airline pilots, is to fly to the highest levels of safety. But we're also mindful of the noise community, and I'm really encouraged by the development and operation of newer generation aircraft, which are much, much quieter than those that have been flying out of Palomar many years ago. I got my start in aviation as a dispatcher before I was a pilot working in the office, and I routinely remember at another airport having to stop phone conversations due to very old generation Gulfstream II airplanes going by. It was so loud you could feel the rumble in the floor, and you'd have to stop your phone conversation. Gone are those days. We're operating much more efficient and much quieter aircraft. And so I'm encouraged with the type of aircraft that we're operating throughout the National Airspace System, including those in and out of Palomar Airport, and looking forward to what the next generation of aircraft may look like. But I think we have to remember, even just 10 or 15 years ago, the noise footprint of the airport has changed. And I think on the commercial airline side, it's often changed for the better in terms of the type of aircraft and noise exposure, as opposed to some of the older, noisier airplanes.
Yeah, thank you very much for that perspective, Jason. And Jamie, again, just summarize what you're doing to ensure that what steps you're taking to improve safety and noise for the communities.
Sure. And Raquel, I think you said this was the last question, so I'll just take the opportunity to thank you and the FAA and the panel of experts here for partnering with us tonight. So, for us, the county, it goes back to making sure that we do the outreach and that we're listening to the community when it comes to noise. Whether that's through the PAC or whether that's submitting noise complaints and being able to reach back out if they would like some follow-up. And so bolstering up resources for that program, focusing on outreach for the VNAP program, education, and constantly reviewing ways to mitigate noise through our VNAP subcommittee and all the tools that we have available. And so noise is important to us because we know it's an impact to the community. Just real quick on the safety piece, I think EMAS was a really good example. We do a master planning process and we come up with innovative ideas to improve safety, and EMAS is just one of those. And so that's really what the process is meant for, is to flush out all the ideas on how we can improve safety on current conditions and then in future conditions as well. And so that's really our number one focus, is safety. So
great. Well, thank you very much. Hopefully, collectively, we have kind of highlighted how we are all working together to improve the safety and the noise conditions at the airport, and also really in the rest of the national airspace. We have reached the end of the workshop. We received so many questions from the audience. We heard a lot of informative answers from our panelists, but we understand that maybe not all the questions were answered. So as mentioned in the workshop, you may submit your additional information or comments through the FAA's portal. I already mentioned that earlier, and I think, like I said, it's going to be, oh, there it is. If you'd like to view this workshop again, please visit the FAA platforms such as Facebook and YouTube. You may also visit the FAA Community Engagement website, where you'll find community engagement videos and complimentary information on what we provided today. Before closing, I'd like to state that this workshop and discussion don't constitute a final agency action or order issued by the Secretary of Transportation under Title 49, United States Code Section 46110. This meeting was informational only and as part of an ongoing dialogue between the FAA and our external stakeholders. Thank you so much, Congressman Mike Levin, for your engagement throughout this process. Thank you to our specialists in this panel for providing your expertise, and also for the folks in the back room helping us out. Thank you very much, of course, to our audience for your interest and participation. Have a good evening.